Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robo. I'm joined by my co-host, Jacob Hare. And today we're very lucky to be joined by a Sixers beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Keith Pompey. Keith, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
So let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into the interview. So how did you get into basketball and how did you end up at the Inquirer?
Long story short, with the Inquirer, I had a cousin. I'm from Philly, but I had a cousin who was getting married one week, and I was living in Myrtle Beach at the time. And I came up for his wedding, and I had a buddy who worked for the Inquirer, and I said, please get me in the building. And he got me in the building, and he introduced me to like one of the higher editors, and he introduced me to the sports editor. And then like I was working for the Inquirer like 2 months later. So it was just, lucky that I was like, hey, hire me. I'm this guy. I'm this great guy. But in regards to basketball, like when I first started, I was a high school writer. And I covered high school sports in South Jersey and PA. And then, as I progressed, I started covering small colleges, and then I became a Temple men's basketball beat writer in football. And then from there, it was like one day this guy calls me and says, hey, man, I'm covering Temple. And I'm like, well, if you're covering Temple, what are they going to do with me? And I was like a little upset. And then he was like, I think you're going to replace me on the Sixers beat. And I didn't want to take it at the time. But I felt like if I turned it down, then someone else would have had the job and they would have done a great job, then I would have been out of luck. So I took the job. So that's how now it's 8 years. It's going on. This will be my 8th season.
What was preventing you from taking the job?
Well, the thing is, it was like I always wanted to cover them, but I knew that the team was going to be kind of bad. And maybe that's not the reason, but it was also selfishly, this might sound crazy to you, but so that year, that football year, like Temple was pretty good, and they were going to go to Notre Dame, and they were going to play like the first game of the season at Notre Dame, and that was like a bucket list. Like I was like, I want to go to Notre Dame, so it was like any year but this year, because I wanted to go and see what it was like at Notre Dame. I want to see what the atmosphere. But yeah, so it was like selfishly. And the thing, I was more of a college basketball fan, and then I was NBA. Like I really didn't pay attention to the NBA until the playoffs started. So I wanted the job because it was a big beat. I just didn't want it that season.
Do you still follow college basketball closely?
Not like I used to. I mean, I tried to, but it's hard because when you're covering the NBA, you're so into the Sixers and teams that they play to where it's hard to dip down and see. Now, again, everyone, like, let's just say Zion, Zion Williamson, when he played, you saw him, but it's kind of sort of like, some of these guys that people were saying late in the first round or whatever, you have to really do some research to find out who that person is nowadays. But back in the day, I knew who all of them were, So.
And were you a Sixers fan before you
You know what? I was, but then, see, I'm way older than you guys. I'm probably like, I'm old enough to be your fathers, right? So, so the thing is, I used to love the Sixers, and then when they traded Barkley, I like boycotted the Sixers a little bit. Like I was upset, like, how are you going to get rid of Barkley? Now, again, Charles Barkley wanted to leave, but then after that point, I stopped being a Sixers fan, per se. And then, like, I lived down south for I went to school at Pitt, and then I moved down south for like 10 years. So I really didn't have any ties to the Sixers while I was away. I was more of a fan of players than pro teams, excuse me. Yeah.
So let's move on to our Sixers questions. This is a big offseason for the Sixers. They got new head coach Doc Rivers. They got a new president of basketball operations, Daryl Morey. But what do you believe was the most important move that they've made this offseason so far?
The most important move that they made this offseason was, I guess, getting rid of Al Horford's contract. That was the biggest move. And the reason being is you look at it for two reasons. Well, you got rid of the money is going to help you breathe a little bit. And secondly, you traded him for a shooter, and this team desperately needs a shooter. Because before that happened, I always felt like, yes, you have Doc Rivers, who's a Hall of Fame coach. You have Daryl Morey, who's one of the most recognizable front office executives in the world, right? But if the pieces don't fit, I don't care who's coaching the team and who's, the executive, the team was going to struggle. So I think that move right then and there was probably the biggest move to springboard things to me. So I really like that one.
Do you think the Sixers still need to make some more moves here, or do you think that what they have now is enough for them?
I do think they need to make another move. Like I do. And I know a lot of people are talking about James Harden. It doesn't have to be him. I mean, because it seems like the Sixers really want to keep Ben Simmons. But I think what they need is when you look at the team now, you have a dominant post player in Joel. You have Ben Simmons who can go 100 miles an hour and find open shooters. You have Tobias Harris, who's going to be your third star, so to speak. But what they don't have is they don't have a perimeter player who can, you say, let's spread the floor and let this guy go to work. And I think for the Sixers to make that next step, that's the type of player they'll have to get. They'll have to go out there and get a guy who can get his own shot. I mean, and I don't see that on this roster right now.
Well, if the Sixers acquired that player via trade, who do you think they'd give up in that trade?
See, that's tough because – like if in order for them, if you want an upper echelon type of guy, like an all-star or all NBA, let's say all NBA, right? You would have, in order to make that trade work, you would have to give up like a Joel Embiid or a Ben Simmons, or maybe you have to give up like a Tobias Harris, but then throw in a bunch of assets. Even so, it's tough to me, like for them to do that. Like Ben Simmons would be the guy that everyone would want, just because, he has, he's making a lot of money, but he has years left on his salary. He was a two-time All-Star. He was all defensive player, all NBA. So if you get that type of player, you would have to give him up. And I don't think the Sixers, want to do that right now. I think right now what they're going to do is try to see what these other guys, can do with the guys around them.
So obviously the Sixers also hired head coach Doc Rivers this offseason. Was that the best possible hire the Sixers could have made?
Yeah, I feel sorry for Mike D'Antoni because it's like if I felt like if the owner for the Clippers waited 2 days, Mike D'Antoni would have been the head coach. But when you look at the candidates right now, Doc Rivers, the reason why he is the best possible hire, he had a bad year, a bad playoff, right? But if you go back 2 years ago, Doc Rivers, Greg Popovich, they were like, on the two best coaches in the league. You know what I mean? They were the ones that everyone wanted, everyone respected. So when Doc Rivers becomes available, you have to go out and you have to go get him because he was the best available guy, yeah.
And what about his new colleague, Daryl Morey? It seemed like the Sixers really wanted him $10 million per year.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit what went into that hire?
It's weird because, I think $10 million went into that hire. That's the one thing. But an offer he couldn't refuse. Daryl says that, he was willing to walk away. Like he did walk away. He was going to be at home with his kids, or he was going to spend time with them. And then this offer came up. Now, the one thing that I will say about the Sixers is, now you may have some people saying, "Hey, look, dude, was this in the works before?" Like, you're getting all this. But the one thing everyone assumes, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say, Daryl Morey has been a guy that they were interested in hiring for a long time. If people. Now, they remember, like, Sam Hinkie was one of his proteges. So if you can't get Daryl Morey, let's get the guy who Daryl Morey trained. And then when Brian Colangelo left, they went after Daryl Morey again. And then this year, they went after him right after the bubble. And then, they said they didn't, but they did. So, and then all of a sudden they get him now. So yeah, like for what the 76ers want to do, they want to have this free flowing style of play. They're invested in analytics. And when you look at Daryl Morey, he is one of the big analytic guys, not just in the NBA, but in all pro sports. So just like Doc was the best option, I look at Daryl Morey as the best option for someone, for something that the Sixers want to do.
Does Elton Brand still have a big role in the front office, or is he kind of just like there to Daryl Morey?
I think, initially when Daryl Morey came, everyone was saying, what is Elton going to do? What is Elton going to do? And I think like it's kind of like an apprenticeship, but not one. Like from what I'm hearing is that, when the trade deadline, not the trade, the trades and all this stuff and the draft, Elton Brand was the guy who made a lot of phone calls, trying to see, what would it take to get trades, this and that. And I noticed that what Daryl Morey does a lot is he tries to include them in a lot of things. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the photo of Dwight Howard when Dwight Howard landed, it wasn't just Daryl Morey, it was Elton Brand. So, are we going to fool ourselves and make it seem like Elton has a lot of power? No. I mean, ultimately, the decision is going to be Daryl's. But I think that for Elton, I think that this is a better situation for him because he can learn from someone who has experience. And then he can be like a sponge and get as much information to whereas 3 years, he could go somewhere and be way better prepared for running an organization than he would have been if he would have done it this year, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So, last season was rather underwhelming for the Sixers. High expectations and really injuries along the way and poor play never really fulfilled the expectations. What is the biggest step the Sixers need to take if they want to be better than they were last season?
The biggest step, there's a lot of things you can say, right? The biggest step, but a lot. All right, there's two things, right? In my opinion. One thing is, it comes down to Joel Embiid. And I know this is a cliche. Joel Embiid is two things that he has to do. He has to stay healthy. I don't expect him to play a lot of games, and he has to be in shape, right? He has to do that. He has to stay healthy and be in shape because no matter who else they brought all these guys in there, Joel Embiid is the best player on the team, and a lot of their success revolves around him. Secondly, Ben Simmons has to start making some shots, like attempting some shots from outside of the paint. And the reason being is like, we're sitting here and earlier in the podcast, you guys asked me what do the Sixers need? Mm-hmm. And I said they need a guy who can do certain things. Well, if Ben Simmons would start taking some shots from the mid-range at least and doing certain things, people will have to defend him differently. And I think when that happens, he can become that guy that I think they need to go out and get. So to me, those are the most important things. I know they got a new coach, they have new additions, but I think it all starts with Joel and Ben. In order for them to make that next level, Ben has to be, become the guy that people hope he can be, and Joel has to be the guy that we know he can be,
Yeah, for sure. Some nights Joel Embiid could be 40 and 20, and then some nights he could be in the fourth quarter and he's already gassed by the end of the game and he can't make a jumper. I totally agree with you that he needs to be in shape. What do you think Doc Rivers is going to do to ensure that these two live up to their potential?
From what I hear, Doc is a straight shooter. Mm-hmm. Like he'll say, "Hey, look, man, you guys are playing poorly," or "Hey, this is bad." He won't sugarcoat things with them. But in regards to that, I think that when the biggest thing is, Doc Rivers has a resume of Hall of Fame players, and it gets to a point where when you do that, you have more credibility with the guys. Like you can say, "Hey, look, this is what Kevin Garnett did, or this is what Ray Allen did, or someone, or So I think that it's not going to be like rah 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 in your face. Now he may put them in certain situations, but I just think that when you have a coach who coached those type of players that want to be where Ben and Joel wants to be at, I think that, you know what I mean, he gets a little bit more respect from them than any other coach would.
Do you believe that Brett Brown was sugarcoating it last season to those two players?
I think so at times. I do. I think that. Well, I think it was one of those things where, I think Ben and Joel have a lot of power. Brett Brown was basically, he was on thin ice from the start of the season. Like, we all knew if they didn't go far in the playoffs, he was going to be gone. Well, when stuff like that happens, it's like you have to appease your star players, especially in the situation here in Philadelphia where, Joel Embiid is really good friends with Michael Rubin, one of the owners, the other owners. It's kind of like if you piss the player off, excuse my French, but if you upset the player, then next thing you know, the player could go to the owner and say, get him out of here. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think, Brett was, he wasn't as hard as he could have been on those two. That is correct.
So basically, like, Joel Embiid was the coach's son who always asked to play pitcher and got it.
Kind of, yeah. He tried to discipline, but yeah. Joel Embiid was the guy. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: in most organizations, like let's just throw. I'm not putting them in the same category as LeBron, but let's just say we're going to go wherever LeBron was, Cleveland, the Lakers. He's the superstar. So superstars have star treatment. The superstars are basically, in most instances, have more power than the coaches. So when you think of the 76ers, you look at Joel as the powerful one, and then Ben. And, when Brett Brown was in a situation where, there was a lot of pressure on him. Now, when you're a guy like Doc Rivers, and there is still going to be pressure on him, but when you can say that I won an NBA title, and I had these certain type of Hall of Famers, and not only that, hey, you're paying me $8 million a year, like for 5 years. Well, then you get some more leeway because team doesn't want to fire you because they're on the hook for all that money. So it's kind of like a little different circumstances. And if it doesn't work out with Doc Rivers as far as his control and players, well, then it doesn't become a Brett Brown problem. It doesn't become a Doc Rivers problem. It becomes a Sixers problem, like the culture is bad. You understand what I'm saying? So I think the whole dynamic changes with Doc.
So lastly, before we wrap up and let you go here, how good can this Sixers team be this season?
That's a great question because, I know a lot of people are talking about, oh, they're going to go to the championship. They have the shooters. I think it's a great question, but it's also a hard question to answer because I want to see if Ben Simmons is going to unleash the beast, so to speak, right? And then second, if not, I want to see if they're capable of bringing in a top-notch player who can get his own shot. If they can do that, I can say they're probably like a top 3 team in the East. If not, I'm thinking they're like the 5th seed in the East right now because as good as these additions are, none of these guys are guys that you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, 5 seconds left. I want to spread the floor and let Danny Green go to work. Seth Curry go to work, Dwight Howard. I just don't see that. So, and if they can go out and get that guy, I think they're better. If not, I think they're like a 5th seed in the East.
I certainly agree with you there. I mean, last season they were the 6th seed and they let down everybody. But I mean, the 6th seed, the 5th seed, I just don't see that they have the power to keep up with the best teams in the East right now.
Yeah, I agree.
So thanks for joining us today, Keith, and we really appreciate it. And let's go Birds tonight, everyone.
All right. Yeah, they got to get this a win.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to thank y'all for having me on your podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you so much for coming on.